Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express-News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
Carrie Clatt, columnist, editorial board.
Metro editor Greg Jefferson.
Nancy Pryor-Johnson, associate editorial board editor.
And a lot of news happening in Texas politics this week. We've got a debate on Friday between Governor Greg Abbott and his Democratic challenger, Beto O'Rourke. In San Antonio, we had Councilman Mario Bravo suspended from his committee assignments by Mayor Ron Nirenberg last Friday over some kind of a personal attack that Mario Bravo initiated against fellow council member Ana Sandoval. And we also seen a dark money group spend more than $259,000 in ads on KSAT and KENS against Republican county judge candidate Trish DeBerry, and you can read all about all of those stories in the Express News, and we'll probably be following up on some of them. But the big thing, of course, is just that we're in election season, and we want to make, I think everyone who cares about this wants to make sure that the elections run smoothly and that there's access for everyone. And I don't think there's been anybody in Bexar County government who's been more engaged in the issue of voter access and having fair elections than our guest today, County Commissioner Justin Rodriguez. He's a former state representative, former city council member, and he really took the lead in 2020, in particular at the height of the pandemic, to make sure that people had access to voting. Commissioner, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to see everybody in person. And I would ask what's been happening since I last saw you in 2019. But I think we can tick through the snowpocalypse and a global pandemic. But it's so good to be with you guys, and happy to see Nancy's here. You got some great folks, and Carrie on the podcast as well. So thanks for having me. Look forward to the conversation.
Well, I think it was a few weeks ago that the Commissioner's Court approved 259 Election Day voting sites, but asked Jackie Howland with the Elections Office to try to come back with more. I think 43 more, because 302 I think was the number that you all had in 2020. Where do we stand now with that? And how concerned are you about making sure that there are enough sites?
Yeah. So let me give some context first to, I think, the whole election site conversation. If you go back before even 2019, when I got on Commissioner's Court, you remember that we were using precinct level voting sites. So let's say, Nancy, you were in precinct 2024. You were, by virtue of that, tethered to your neighborhood polling location for Election Day, right? We always had early voting. But if you waited to Election Day, you had to go to your specific school. In my case, Woodlawn Hills, which is up the street from where I live. In 2019, we enacted the vote centers, which is part of, I think, important context and background for this conversation we're about to have, because by virtue of the vote centers now, in addition to the early voting sites where you can go anywhere, now on Election Day, we have vote centers where you can go anywhere, right? So I think adds a lot more access, predictability for voters. You don't show up and say, "Oh, sir, ma'am, you're in the wrong location." So it's certainly an advancement, I think, for voting rights. So that was enacted in 2019. Now, by virtue of that, the legislature put in effect kind of a scaled down provision if you chose to do so. So like you mentioned, we had 302 vote center sites. There is a permissive law on the books that says you can scale that back now if you've gone to vote centers. So you don't necessarily have to have 302. You can scale that back by 50 or 60% if you wanted to. So look, I'm of the thought we give voters as much opportunity, access, options as possible. I had a little bit of heartburn about reducing those numbers. And look, if there's going to be a trade-off, in my estimation, now the way things have progressed and the trend line is majority of voters are taking advantage of early voting, right? I mean, I think it's 65% or so. So if we're going to scale back, on the one hand, Election Day sites, let's increase the number of early voting sites, which is what we did this election cycle. So in 2022, as we go to the polls here in a few weeks, we're going to have 51 early voting sites. It's the most we've ever had here in Bexar County. But we also asked our elections administrator, look, if you're going to scale back the election day sites, there should probably be a better public transparent process of how you're going to do that because, Ms. Garcia, who lives on the west side by Wren Middle School in Edgewood, has gone to Wren Middle School in Edgewood for the last 50 years, and she's walked up on election day, right? And if you're closing that, there is a chance you are going to disproportionately impact communities of color, those communities that don't have great transportation, and so we've asked her, look, let's slow this down a little bit. And if we're going to eliminate voting sites on election day, perhaps we do it in phases. Perhaps we do it with a process post 2022 election. So we have asked her. Her recommendation that she brought back to court a few weeks ago was 259 election day sites. So it was going to eliminate some. We've asked her to add back the 302. As of this recording, we don't have a status on that yet, but we're getting very short on time to get notice out to voters on what the election day sites will be. We do know that we'll have the 51 early voting sites, and those are being, I think, published as we speak. But the election day sites are the ones that have been proposed to be reduced again from about 300 to 259. And not just myself, but other commissioners had some concern about that. And so we all asked her to come back with the 50 additional sites to keep intact the 302 for this election cycle.
In 2020, you took some steps to try to make sure that during the pandemic, people could vote in a way that was going to be safe for them and make sure there was plenty of access. One of the things you put forward was you had the mega centers where people were able to vote. You also one of the things you did was you sent out applications for mail ballots to everyone who qualified, people 65 and over, and so on. And last year we had a state law passed, a pretty restrictive election law, which among the other things it did, it eliminated that or banned that. And we've talked about that a lot on the podcast because I've tried to make sense of it. And I'm sure that's something that bothered you. When you did
it's completely frustrating. And I think it underscores the attack on voting rights that we've seen. Look, I sat through some of those legislative sessions and engaged in some of those discussions about what I believed and others believe was the intent of some of these laws. I think in 2017, which was my last legislative session, the Republicans eliminated straight ticket balloting. Now, look, you could argue there's merits on both sides of that. In fact, I will tell you, and maybe it's because I'm a lawyer, I never voted straight ticket, but I don't like taking options away from voters, right? That was an option of convenience for voters. And they did that very specifically in 2017 to make it effective in the 2020 presidential election. Surprise, surprise. So there are concerns that I've had, and I've witnessed firsthand why there are people out there who believe the fewer voters that vote, the better for certain parties and special interests. And I'm of the opposite mind. My thinking is, look, the more people that engage in this process, what's become a very delicate process of democracy, right? The better. And it's concerning. I think in the 2020 election, we saw a significant rejection rate of mail ballots. I'm sorry, in the last municipal election, because of this law that was passed. I think it was somewhere close to 30% rejection rate. That was reduced in the subsequent election because we had to be a little bit more deliberate about educating folks. And I think, Gilbert, you and I spoke last year sometime. My own mom, her ballot was rejected because of the confusion, right? And there's, I think, very deliberate confusion on the parts of the people that write these bills. And so we've got to combat that some way. And I think the only way we can combat that at the local level is by education, by outreach. The county's engaged someone this cycle to make sure that not just through an outreach campaign and public awareness campaign, but actually folks going into senior centers and explaining to them, this is how you have to do it. And, let's cross all the T's, dot all the I's, just so that you can make sure you don't have any ballots returned or any confusion. So it's very concerning. And I will tell you, I felt part of what we did in 2020, unlike, some other communities, but also very similar to, say, Harris County. We tried to extend the voting hours. In fact, we did extend the voting hours in 2020. Gilbert, you mentioned the mega sites. That was in part due to COVID, right? We wanted people to be able to come in public and vote safely. So we used like the AT&T Center as an example, St. Paul Community Center in my community, just so you could come in and there'd be enough space for folks to vote safely in person. So those type of things, I think, were obviously noted by folks in Austin, and some things they didn't like. They didn't like the extra hours that we were giving folks. And because of that, we saw even more restrictive laws passed this last session, including as you mentioned, the applications to mail ballots. So we cannot be proactive this cycle and mail out the applications. And we're not talking about the actual ballot.
It's like fill this out just to get the ballot.
We can't. If we see someone that has historically, who's, let's say, like my mom, in her 70s, who's historically voted by mail, we cannot proactively send her an application. She's got to go through the ropes and make sure she fills out everything to get her ballot. So it's unfortunate. It's discouraging. But I think at the same time, people who I think are like-minded, like myself and others, are I think even more dogged about making sure that people engage and also get people registered as well. We got a lot of new voters that are energized by, I think, the candidates at the top of the ballot this cycle.
One of the things that we saw in this Texas election law was that it empowered partisan poll watchers. And this is coming off of a 2020 election cycle when we had obviously a lot of controversy about the presidential result, and we had election workers in Georgia and in other places being targeted. They were being harassed and threatened just for doing their jobs. And more recently here in Texas, we had the elections office in Gillespie County. They all quit, and basically because they were facing harassment. How worried are you as someone who elections are? This is a big issue for you. How concerned are you not only in Bexar County, but looking at things more broadly about just the health of our election system when we have people probably being discouraged from working in it?
It's absolutely discouraging. And what I would say first and foremost, that those people locally and elsewhere who step up to work these elections are largely volunteers. I mean, some of them do get paid, but not very much, right? And so they're doing this, I think, because they feel a duty, a call to serve. But I think it's important to distinguish two things, particularly because, as you all know, I've had my disagreements with our elections administrator here locally, and I've said this publicly, and I've said this to her, I've never had a disagreement with her about competency or the integrity of elections, right? I mean, there's never been a doubt that when you cast a ballot here in Bexar County, that it counts and it's being counted, and there's no concerns about that, right? And I make that very clear because I think some of the things you're referring to that are occurring not just here but all over are people who are impugning the integrity of the process, right? And my argument has always been about innovating and being more accessible with our elections, and so I think those are two distinct arguments, and so I think the people who are causing these concerns here and all over the country are people who bought into a former president's line that this last election was stolen, all of a sudden they think that trickles down to, local elections, which I think is unfortunate. And it's a little bit depressing, frankly, that people are buying into this because there's been absolutely no evidence of fraud anywhere. So it's putting people, as you mentioned, in harm's way because there are other folks who are taking these allegations literally, and they think that somehow the people that are working elections are part of this conspiracy, right, to not have their vote counted.
Well, given that, is the county providing, or will the county provide extra security?
That's not correct.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a good question, and we also have to be very careful about that because you don't want sheriff's patrol or SAPD patrol lining up at election sites because that also could be perceived as voter intimidation, right? And so I think what we're preparing for is to make sure we have folks at the ready if we need them to be, but also that we have experts and expertise on the election process and voting process, so that if judges have questions while in the voting process, they can refer those questions to a hotline or someone that can answer those questions. So I think it's multiple. It's not just physical security, but I think it's also making sure we have the legal expertise to answer questions when someone comes in and says, well, you can't do this, or you're looking over my shoulder, you can't look at my ballot. I'm concerned we're going to have quite a few of those instances, this not just here, but all over. And it really is, a detriment to the process because I can see people being discouraged about following through with their vote because there's nonsense like that going on. And so we're having those discussions. I don't know that we've got it completely vetted out because we have to be very careful about that intimidation factor too.
What about increased physical security after the election for the courthouse?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we're talking about too. I mean, not just security, as you mentioned at the election sites, but you're talking about when the votes are counted
and afterwards.
Yes, and afterwards, and the ensuing
weeks.
Whoever wins and who doesn't win. We've had some of those conversations, and I have a lot of confidence in Sheriff Salazar and his team, and making sure that. As well as Chief McManus and SAPD, making sure the community's safe because it's unpredictable. It's an unpredictable environment, and look, I don't anticipate that we're going to have any problems locally. I mean, maybe that's the optimist in me. I have maybe more faith in humanity than sometimes I should. But
it's a heavily Democratic county.
There you go. Yeah. So I think
there wouldn't be that many contested.
That's right. I mean, I think you're going to see, probably most of the Democrats win, at least in my estimation here locally, if not all. And so, but you're right. I mean, you have a governor's race at the top of the ticket here in Texas that, depending on who you ask, is getting closer and closer as the days go by. A lot of energy. I know Beto's in town this week, and it seems like he's in town every other day. He's all over the place, but you're right. I mean, I think we have to be prepared for, you expect the best, but you prepare for the worst, right? And I think that's the mentality we're taking.
There have been some threats to Bexar County, right, to the elections office. And we talk as well about the security or the lack of security at schools.
Yeah. That's another great point, Nancy. We haven't talked about that because one of, I think, the issues that was raised was we talked about the vote centers earlier, particularly more as it relates to the election day. Quite a few of those are on school campuses, right? Elementary and middle school, high school campuses. So we did have some principals, superintendents express some concern about people coming in and out for election day. I think as of now, I think there's been a couple of school districts, Northeast, I believe, and maybe North Side, that have basically said we're going to take that as a student holiday or a school holiday, which I think is great. And I think I hope more school districts will follow the lead, because here's the thing. When you think about, and I mentioned earlier, as an example, Miss Garcia, who votes at Ren every year, that's what they're used to, right? And schools are hubs for communities, right? And they should be, but in this day and age, should we be a little more concerned about people going onto a campus when there's schools? We have to be. I mean, it's now part of our consciousness to make sure we're being as safe as possible. So I think that's going to be part of the concern, certainly this going forward. And then in the future, right? Do we look for alternative places to have elections so that people are not going in and out of schools? And I think for now, I think the best solution is what some of the superintendents have done, and that's just said, look, keep it at our local school. We're just not going to have people on campus, and I think that's a great solution. But is it something that is sustainable? I don't know. I think this is a perfect time to do it, though, and hopefully it works out.
A few months ago, representatives for the San Antonio Spurs went to Commissioner's Court asking to amend the non-relocation contract that they have with the county. I guess basically asking for the ability to play at least a couple more games outside of the AT&T Center. And so my understanding is this next season there'll be 4. There'll be 2 in Austin, 1 in Mexico, and 1 at the Alamo Dome. And the Commissioner's Court approved that, because of the emotion that the emotional connection between San Antonio and the Spurs, people, these kinds of things tend to get people a little nervous. This just recently we had Congressman Tony Gonzalez filing legislation which would make it, I guess, harder for the Spurs and other teams in similar markets to relocate. How seriously do you, when you have people, expressing nervousness about the possibility the Spurs could leave? How do you see this?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a tough issue. And by the way, I thought I was a big Spurs fan. Man, Tony Gonzalez, he's a Spurs fan. He is an honorary baseline bum. But no, look, it makes us all a little bit nervous, right? And look, part of it is just our mentality, right? We're small market, San Antonio. This is our team. We all bleed silver and black. So when you start seeing these things, you get a little bit insecure, right? I mean, it's just the nature of who we are. We've seen it before where the teams flirted with potentially moving, or at least there's rumors back in the day. And, we had folks like Robert McDermott and Red McCombs come in and save us. Of course, David Robinson helped as well.
A little bit.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. Yeah. So look, I'll tell you how this played out. I mean, they came to me. I guess this was 6 months ago, maybe a little bit longer. Actually, the rumors were probably started about a year ago that they wanted to try and play some games outside of the city. And the way they presented this was, look, we're here in San Antonio to stay. But this has increasingly become a competitive deal, not just to retain fans, but to attract new fans. We want to become kind of a regional team, right? I mean, look at what the Cowboys have done up the road in Dallas. I mean, you go all the way to the Rio Grande Valley and into Mexico. That's true. Cowboy fans, right? So that's the way it was pitched to me. Look, the Spurs are our partner at the county. I mean, I'm a fan, but they're also our business partner, right? And when your business partner comes to you and says, I have an idea that can help us be more competitive, perhaps attract more fans, perhaps bring in more revenues, you have to listen to them and take it at face value. Now, did the radar go off to me when they said we want to play a couple games in Austin? Absolutely. But they initially came and said they wanted to do a 2-year deal. I don't want to speak for the judge, but I don't think he was too keen on committing to this. And so I helped negotiate this compromise, which was a 1-year pilot program, 2 games in Austin, 1 in Mexico, and then 1 to commemorate the 50th year of the Spurs. It'll be played in the Alamo Dome this season. And so, Peter John Holt, who's now is the majority owner of the Spurs, when he sits in your office and looks you in the eye and says, this is what we want to do it, we have no intention of moving, how can you not take them at their word, right? And look, this is also a business, so I get it too. And have people been lied to before in business? I'm sure they probably have, but I think in that instance, you have to take them at face value. I think you have to give them an opportunity to prove this out. And I'll tell you, I mean, they're probably going to be knocking on our door too soon to do a second year, right? Even though the first year hasn't even been played out yet, because I think that was what they wanted to do initially. So, look, I did get a call right before we made that deal from Congressman Gonzalez. He was very adamant about this not happening. He thought it was, the camel's nose under the tent, and it was just the beginning of the end. And I just kind of assured him that we were doing the best we were or could do with the information we had. And so I have not talked to him since that conversation. I mean, that was months ago.
So the congressman contacted you before the media coverage of this?
Well, I'm trying to remember the timing of this. This was no, it was not before. It was literally it was either the day before.
That
we were
is
going
a
to
super
vote.
fan. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It wasn't that.
Okay.
It wasn't that early. It was basically the day before Commissioner's Court.
Okay, got it.
You guys were on top of it, man. Yeah, you guys were on top of it before he was.
Of course.
Yeah, but
just
so,
trying to gauge his seriousness as a super fan.
I would say you follow a bill in Congress. You're either like a super fan or you're super infatuated.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Well,
it could be both, but yeah. So it's I don't understand. Everything that he's done. I haven't read the bill, frankly, so I don't know what his plan is. But look, I mean, as of now, the Spurs are committed to San Antonio under contract through 2032, and I would guess in the coming years they're going to come to us to potentially renegotiate that deal. There's a lot of things that have to happen between now and then with respect to the AT&T Center and the viability of any economic development around the AT&T Center. The new practice facility is already broken ground.
Do you think they're happy with the AT&T Center? I mean, I still think of it as a new arena, but it's 20 years old.
I know.
So,
yeah.
I mean,
you know what? I think they are. But, when you compare it to today's state-of-the-art arenas, it needs some improvements, right?
So, have they begun talking with county commissioners about what improvements they might need?
So I think there's kind of a walking, checklist of things that are more technology based, but they've not come to us, as far as I know, with a significant ask, like tens of millions of dollars in renovations. Now, and I'm going to have our DA's office double check this. I think if we were to do something like that, we'd have to go back to voters because you remember this was paid for with visitors tax. And so if there's going to be a $50, $80, $100 million upgrade at AT&T, we'd have to renew that pledge to the voters on that.
Is there anything that the county can do along with the Spurs because you mentioned economic development, to actually promote economic development around the AT&T Center?
Yeah.
Which is nil.
I think that there is a lot we can do. There's more we can be doing. I know there's ongoing discussions about the use of the golf course, which is really adjacent to it. I don't have any, knowledge about any behind the scenes negotiations. So I'm not divulging anything necessarily, but, you've also got the Coca-Cola site there that I think, probably creates a little bit of a hindrance in terms of property. But when you look at, and I forget the exact acreage, I think when you look at the AT&T Center plus the Freeman, I think it's about 80 acres, if not a little bit more. And we haven't really gone up out there. If you think about it, it's all surface lots. So I think there's opportunity. And believe me, I talked to Bobby Perez at the Spurs and Derek Howard at the Freeman frequently. There are people who are interested in doing something more in lines with an entertainment district, right? Where you've got hotels and you've got, apartments, office space, commercial. We just need some kind of catalyst. And I think, really a significant infusion of dollars. The mayor's also talked about, the transportation obstacle, maybe an east-west via route that would bring people down to the corridor. So look, that's it. This is just me speaking, but I think in order for us to ensure if that is truly where the Spurs are going to be for the next 20 years, we've got to do something along those lines to really energize that corridor and put new life into it. Because, look, there's people out there all the time that say, look, the Spurs should have never left downtown and they belong back downtown. I don't know where that space is. The city's going to have to grapple with the Alamo Dome and what they do with the dome, right? We talk about the AT&T Center being 20 years old, double that almost with respect to the Alamo Dome.
Right.
So look, here's the exciting thing. I don't shy away from having to make tough decisions. I'm going to miss Nelson tremendously because he's been a great leader.
I was going to ask you about that these last few months.
So we're going to have a lot to grapple with the new judge, particularly on this issue. But since I kind of segued into your segue, Nelson has just been, just once in a generation kind of leader. And I feel pretty privileged to spend so much time with him. And I feel sometimes a little selfish spending so much time with him. He and Tracy as well have done so much for our community. And people ask me all the time, like, Nelson's only got like 2 or 3 months left. Is he slowing down? I'm like, no, he's actually ramped it up a little bit because he sees the end coming. We've got so many things that are on our plate right now from the county's perspective that I think it's almost like he there's not enough time, and he wants so much to do so many things unrelated to baseball, but baseball too. But he has left a mark on this community that is just, it's hard to match it, right? And, I spend, either on the phone or in person time with him pretty frequently. And I just try to soak it up. I mean, he's just a wealth of knowledge. But I think what you'll see in the last few months is some meaningful investments. We still have our ARPA dollars, the money that the county received from the federal government because of the recovery plan. And there are a lot of needs out there, particularly related to mental health and homelessness and food insecurity, that you're going to see some significant investments in those over the next few months. And I think Nelson feels very strongly about those. We made a huge commitment and investment in public health several months ago, about $60 million in kind of rethinking public health delivery systems in Bexar County. He and I really saw eye to eye on that. And we said, look, we're in this situation having to recover because of this public health crisis. And if we don't do anything on public health, we're idiots, right? And so that's a big part of the county's responsibility. And I think you're going to continue to see that over the next few months.
You were talking about economic development on the east side, and the Republican candidate for County Judge Trista Berry has suggested during the campaign that the county judge has sort of impeded economic development on the west side, and she's advocated for a new jail, or the relocation of the jail. Just curious what you make of that idea.
Hey, I'm all for relocating the jail, but you tell me where, right? I mean, number one, tell me where, and two, you tell me how we come up with $400 million to pay for a new jail. So the jail, just for the listeners, is in my precinct. It's on the near west side. And to a certain degree, I think you could argue that some of the revitalization / gentrification you've seen on the east side, for example, has not happened on the west side because you have this artificial barrier of the public safety facility, in addition to Haven for Hope. And so, look, I've talked to folks, like Henry Cisneros, who's doing some work on the west side. I think that may be a line of thinking that I stole from him, because I think he's mentioned that before. But I also think that there's opportunity on the west side, irrespective of where that facility sits. Is it, a little bit of an eyesore? Sure. But I think that in a way, because it's a public safety presence, it almost can be an area that is one of the safest in the community, right? And so I think if you start talking about it like that, and you see the proximity of downtown, the western edge of downtown to UTSA downtown, and the development that's occurring there. And I think as you see people moving closer to the inner core of the city, over the course of the next 10 years, we're putting between us and the feds probably close to 150 million in the West Side Creeks, which is going to completely help revitalize not just flood control on the western edge of downtown, but also create those recreation opportunities, which add to quality of life. So the West Side, I think, is still very desirable. Do we need work? Do we need meaningful investment? Yes. I just don't know how realistic it is to move a facility like that houses 4,500 people daily. You have so much. You've got to be somewhat in proximity to SAPD and the booking process. Look, it would take a huge probably investment from voters to probably say we're going to help pay for a $400 million jail. I mean, that's a tough sell. So I think in the meantime, we have to do what we can with what we have. And I think there are so many assets on the West Side. I mentioned, the older neighborhoods, but also the cultural significance of the West Side, the Guadalupe Theater, and everything that I think, I'm biased because I live on the West Side and I come from the West Side, but it's a community that is so strong in not just faith, but also pride. And so it's gonna turn. I think we're making these investments, and when you see people relocating, not just families and individuals, but businesses who are coming to the West Side, I think to me the future is very bright. But the jail is just a hard thing to maneuver. I mean, on a daily basis, I don't know how the sheriff deals with it, but there are issues every day in that jail. But I would say this, they're largely contained within the jail, right? So it's not like you've got unsafe conditions around the jail. It's just that it's a transient population. We struggle with keeping the numbers down. Should it be a smaller facility? In my estimation, yes, because we should be treating folks more for substance abuse and mental health crises as opposed to just locking them up. And I think that's something that the county's working on.
So just a few blocks away from the county jail, you've got the UTSA downtown campus, which is starting a really, really sizable expansion. I mean, you've already seen the new data science building on Dolorosa. What impact is that going to have on the near West Side?
I think it's going to have a huge impact. Look, I think number one, you have a community. Well, first of all, let me acknowledge the fact that the West Side is also home to Our Lady of the Lake University and St. Mary's University, two great higher ed institutions. But now you've got UTSA kind of on the other corridor. And number one, I think symbolically, it provides a symbol of hope for our community, right? People, I think that historically have not felt like higher education is accessible. It becomes more and more accessible by coming into the neighborhoods and being that close to the neighborhood. So I think that's the first thing. Secondly, in terms of economic development, I look at communities, and I guess it was last summer in Phoenix, where Arizona State has a great downtown campus that's kind of complements the rest of the downtown. And I think, and I've talked to Dr. Amy about this, I think that's kind of a model for our UTSA downtown is how do you integrate students with businesses, commercial corridors, living spaces. And you're starting to see that, right? We're seeing, for example, and the county is a partner in this housing deal with Weston Urban on the Continental Hotel, which is also in my precinct, the western edge, right on the banks of the San Pedro Creek, where there is going to be opportunity for student housing affordability in that, particularly in that unit. And we're seeing others show interest. At some point, the Frio Street building where SAPD has municipal court and some of their booking, I think long-term, that's probably not going to be there, right? And so what do you do with that? So I think when you look at acreage that's available and you look at opportunity, Certainly, it can't happen soon enough, in my estimation. But I think there's plenty of opportunity to transform that western edge of downtown. And I think if we do it the right way and we do it with community input, then I think it can complement our older communities there. And I think that's part of the concern. And I get it too, because we all have received 2 spam phone calls. One is about your car warranty expiring. The second is about if you're selling your home, right? And you get those on the west side when someone's been in a home for generations. That's a concern, right? And you have speculators that prey on those opportunities. So we have to do it the right way and make sure we have the right partners. But I think from the people I've spoken with, certainly at the city level, we want to collaborate and do it the right way. And I think we will.
Well, before we wrap things up, I wanted to take a question from a listener. We've been inviting people to submit their questions at expressnews.com/Ask Puro. And this question kind of relates to your time in the legislature. The question is, how can we get ballot initiatives in the Texas Constitution, and why don't we? Do you want me to take that, or do you want to take it?
So ballot initiatives, I guess they're talking about
petition.
Let's say, for example, we want to put legalizing marijuana on the ballot, or gambling. Is that the kind of thing they're talking about?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So the way it works, those are more related, I guess, to constitutional amendments. And they'd have to have someone in the legislature sponsor that. And it's almost the same process as having to pass a bill, which is not easy in the legislature. And to get it on the ballot, and it would be
it would be 2/3. I think
it's 2/3.
2/3 in each house.
I'm sorry, 2/3.
It's like a resolution, and then once it gets 2/3 in each house, then it goes to the voters, and then it's a simple majority.
Exactly.
But like some states do allow for initiatives, petition drives, where you can get something. And Texas is just not a state that does.
I'm not aware of that. If it could be citizen driven, to be honest with you, and what we're talking about refers more to like a constitutional amendment, which is why it's a 2/3 threshold. But I know at the local level, certainly you can have citizen-driven petitions, right?
Sure.
And so there may be some way to do it statewide. I'd have to look into that. But I think if you're talking about going to the voters in those off number years, it's typically when elected officials aren't on the ballot, they put the proposals on the ballot. That has to go through the legislature, and it's a 2/3 majority.
Yeah, and so basically, I think if people are at the grassroots level want to see something happen, they really have to kind of work with the people in the legislature to try to see if they can kind of sponsor something like that.
Yeah.
Justin Reese, it's always great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for being
It's been fun. Thank you guys for having me.
And thanks to everyone for listening in. Hope you're doing well, and we'll be back with you next week. Take care.